SoFi Technologies is an interesting financial services company that's trying to replace and become everything you'll need in your life financially. They want to offer car loans, home loans, student loans, personal loans, credit cards, checking accounts, savings accounts, etc., etc. They want to do it all. That being said, the company has an interesting strategy in that it's online only. It does not want to have any physical branches. So far, it's accelerating quickly, gaining millions of new customers at the expense of traditional banks. That's why a lot of investors are interested in SoFi stock. But how much is SoFi stock really worth? I'm going to try and answer that question in this video using the discounted cash flow valuation model to estimate the price of SoFi stock today. Now, I'm going to use a lot of estimates and assumptions to make this prediction or estimate, and I'm going to share with you precisely where I'm getting all these numbers from so you can decide for yourself if the numbers I'm using are accurate, too optimistic, or too pessimistic. Now, there's a lot to cover, so let's get into the details after this brief message for my sponsor. I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now. Okay, so one of the estimates I'm going to use is SoFi management's estimate for adjusted EBITDA in fiscal year 2024. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and adjusted EBITDA is a roughly accurate estimate for a company's free cash flow during a year. Now, it's not precise, and so that's where we begin making estimates already, and you can start to understand the challenges with making a price target evaluation of a company, because we're going to be using so many estimates and assumptions, and we're already starting with 1 year. I'm going to estimate the company's adjusted EBITDA using this number here. SoFi management was kind enough to tell investors what they expect to achieve in terms of earnings per share growth rate beyond the year 2026. They expect to deliver 20 to 25% EPS growth beyond 2026, which is a number I'm going to use for my short run growth rate for SoFi stock. Now, again, this is an earnings per share growth rate I'm going to apply to a cash flow valuation model. And so you can start to see we're drifting further and further away from precise estimates for SoFi already. I also need the beta for SoFi, and right now the company's beta is 1.71 according to the Yahoo Finance calculation for SoFi's beta. I need the beta to calculate the weighted average cost of capital utilizing the capital asset pricing model. I'll share those numbers with you in the model. All right, SoFi's current stock price is $8.32. It has average diluted shares outstanding of 1.065 billion. It has total long-term debt of $3.1 billion. Its total market capitalization is $8.789 billion. And finally, it has cash and equivalents of $2.335 billion on the balance sheet. All right, so now that we have all of our estimates and assumptions that we need to make our stock price estimate, we can now head into the financial model. So what I have modeled here is SoFi's free cash flows expected between the years 2024 and 2035. I forecasted these cash flows using 3 different growth rates. The short run growth rate of 25% that I got from SoFi management, and I applied this growth rate for the first 5 years. This is their short run growth rate. Then I applied a transition period growth rate of 50% of the short run growth rate. So I went from 25% to 12.5% for the next 5 years. Following that period, I estimate that SoFi will settle into its longer run growth rate of 5%. And the reason I use 5%, I get asked sometimes, why do you use 5% as your long run growth rate? Doesn't the economy only grow at roughly 2.5% or 3%? And the answer is yes, real GDP grows at about 2.5 or 3%. But if you look at nominal GDP, which does not account for inflation, that grows at closer to 5%. That's why I chose the long-term growth rate of 5%, because that's where I estimate nominal GDP for developed economies over the longer term. And that's why I'm using 5%. So when I start my forecast for the free cash flows, I start with the 610 million number that I got from SoFi Management's adjusted EBITDA estimate for 2024, and then I applied the 25% growth rate. Now, we need to discount those cash flows in the future because those are money entitled to investors in the future. And all of us watching and evaluating stocks would prefer to have money in our pockets today versus money in our pockets or promise to be in our pockets 5 years from now. And so if you're telling me this money is owed to me 5 years from now, well, that money is worth less to me today than it is in 5 years, right? $100 in the year 2029 is not worth $100 to us today. If it was in our pockets today, it would be worth 100. But if it's 5 years from now, it's worth something less. And so we have to apply a discount to those future cash flows because they're in the future. So when we sum up all of these present values of those future cash flows for SoFi, I get a calculation of 9.354 billion. That's the present value of the cash flows over the next 10 years for SoFi stock. But I don't want to do this to infinity. I don't want to forecast all of those free cash flows all the way out to infinity. Luckily, there's a method we can use to collect all of the cash flows from the year 2035 and beyond, and that's called collecting the terminal value. And we get the terminal value for the year 2034 because we're collecting the cash flows from 2035 and beyond. That terminal value for SoFi is 46.4 billion. And then we need to get the present value of this terminal value. And that comes out to be 14.192 billion. So when we sum that up, the value of operations for SoFi is 23.54 billion. And that collects the present value of the horizon value and the present value of the cash flows. If you're wondering, the weighted average cost of capital I'm using for SoFi stock is 12.59%, applying a cost of debt of 0.095%, which I'm applying a 550 basis point adjustment upward from the risk-free rate of 4%. And then I'm applying a beta of 1.71. And when I use the capital asset pricing model, it gives me a cost of equity of 14.26% for SoFi, and its mix of debt to equity is roughly 65-35. And so when you apply the weighted average cost of capital, the calculation comes out to be 12.6%. We're not done yet. We're almost there. The value of operations at 23.546 billion. We need to add how much cash the company has, and that subtract then the amount of debt the company has. When we add the cash and subtract debt, we get the value of equity for SoFi at 22.774 billion. Then we need to divide the value of equity by the number of shares outstanding to get the price per share estimate for SoFi stock. And when I divide, I get an intrinsic value per share for SoFi stock at $21.38. That's a upside of significant amount from the $8.32 SoFi stock is currently trading at. I do have SoFi stock rated as a buy. I've had SoFi stock rated as a buy all year long, partly because of this calculation and partly because of other valuation estimates and other research I've conducted on SoFi stock. This should not be a be-all, end-all point for decision making. This should just be one tool you use in your toolkit to evaluate SoFi stock. Now, this is for entertainment purposes only. I highly recommend you do further due diligence before deciding to buy or not to buy SoFi stock. But this calculation provides my base case scenario of what I think SoFi stock is worth intrinsically on a price per share basis using these estimates and these assumptions. Hey everyone, if you like watching my videos, then I've added a great complimentary product just for you. I've created a book, I've written a book that's available for sale now that highlights my 6-step investing framework. Even if you don't follow that investing framework, just reading it and knowing how I evaluate stocks will make it a lot more interesting and informative to watch my videos. I've added the link in the description below.